Bible, and in the Catholic Church, starts with the book of Genesis. It reveals to us God's plan for mankind. Yet Genesis can be daunting, especially given the scientific discoveries of the last few centuries. Well, that's where I come in with my new book, Genesis, a Bible study guide and commentary. Discover a thoroughly Catholic approach to this exciting and dramatic ancient narrative that is so often misunderstood. You can get the book now on the store page at AveMariaRadio.net. Check it out.
Only got about a minute and a half left the program. The clock rules. It's kind of the way it is. The clock rules. Sometimes Christians must wonder, if I believed down in the depths of my heart that this person, at least by everything I can observe and understand, will be with God, then I should not be as distressed. I don't know if that necessarily follows. I think so much of it is missing the person, not being with them, knowing the finality of it, knowing that that's it. You'll never see them again on this earth. That, I think, is the kind of realization that can overwhelm somebody. Because so much of what we do is correctable, or it can change, or when there's a sadness that happens, sometimes it lifts, and events in life correct it. But that's the one thing you can't correct. It is unalterable. And I think that is one of the most potent sources of that emotional distress. One thing that Julie didn't bring up, and I'm glad she didn't, many times people's grief is dramatically exacerbated because they feel guilty. Either the way they treated the person or the neglect that they had. You know, your father dies and you hadn't visited him for 7 months because he got on your nerves. Something about where you believe you fell short as a person in their lives, and then they passed away. Or in worst case scenario, you had a major fight, you had a major rift, and it has come to dominate the relationship, and then the person passes away. And that guilt can just radically ratchet up the grief. Okay, well, on that light note, I better get going. I'm Dr. Ray Garandi, and I thank you for joining me here on The Doctor Is In. Walk with God, and maybe you see that person again in eternity.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Celebrating the culture of life. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
This is Mike and Alicia Hernan with the Messy Family Minute. St. John Paul II tells us that family is the school of virtue. But for many parents, it feels like a school of warfare. Siblings, no matter what the age, tend to have conflicts with each other over an endless number of issues. We're here to tell you, first of all, even though it feels like your children will never get along, they can be best friends someday. The fighting doesn't last forever, but you will need to be proactive in developing strong ties between siblings.
First of all, give them the tools.
Start your new year off with true healing. If you've experienced trauma from sexual abuse or assault, you're not alone. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced this. You can find deeper healing through Dawn of Mercy, offering healing for men and women in English and Spanish. Our next Women's English Healing Group starts the first week of February. To learn more and to register for the next group, go to www.dawnofmercy.org.
Are you looking for a faith-filled community and dual language academy for your child to grow spiritually and academically? If so, discover Santa Clara of Assisi Catholic Academy for pre-K 3 and 4 through 8th grade students located at 4550 West Davis Street in Oak Cliff. Contact Principal Laura Watson at 214-333-9423 or email lwatson@santaclaraacademy.org to schedule a tour and enroll your child for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Visit santaclaraacademy.org for more information.
Since 1991, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has formally directed Catholics to avoid investing in companies that violate Catholic teachings in areas such as abortion and contraception. With an over $26 billion investment platform, Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors offers investments compatible with the teachings of our Catholic faith. Certified financial planner James Bell is an investment advisor representative with Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors. He can be reached at 817-608-7853 to learn more about Catholic investments. Sponsor of Guadalupe Radio Network. Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor.
Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome, everybody, to Back to the Father here on this Friday afternoon. It's 1 o'clock Central Time, and I see Cecil running into the studio. I thought maybe I said something wrong, but seems like everything is under control. And wow, is that a new graphic? That looks very nice. Thanks for joining us. This is a show where we talk about the philosophy and the theology of the angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas. We do it live on Fridays during the 1 o'clock hour. Of course, we also create shorts, and some people watch this on a recorded basis. So regardless of whether you're watching it live or recorded, we welcome you, and we hope you will enjoy the conversation today. The main thrust of what we will be talking about today is pessimism versus optimism. And so I'll throw that question out to you. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? And if you are watching us and you are out there on social media live and you want to put your answer in, even if you're watching it on a recorded basis, you can still comment. I just won't be able to respond to you right away. And what makes a person an optimist or a pessimist? What circumstances in life? Is there something innate? Is it just kind of a predisposition that people have to be kind of pessimistic, like our personalities, which we really don't choose? That is the question. And furthermore, who is the man known as the philosopher of pessimism? I think if you asked any, chair of a philosophy department of any university in America, and you said, who is known as the philosopher of pessimism, one name is going to come up. I think pretty much universally. They're going to say, you're talking about Arthur Schopenhauer, huh? Arthur Schopenhauer, for whatever reason, was a very pessimistic man. And so we're going to spend some time talking about his philosophy and maybe some of the reasons why a guy would take such a dark, gloomy view on life. Okay. Before that, though, I just want to say thank you to Sissel Anderson. She's here in the studio. She's mostly just kind of monitoring your comments and things that you put up on social media. She'll jump in when we have something that somebody says. And so we do welcome that. We'd love to hear what is on your mind and any questions or comments that you have about the topics at hand. Okay. So Sissel, you just go ahead and jump in. And also, if Sissel has any comments about the subject matter, she can jump in as well. Where that is certainly welcome, and we appreciate that very much. All right, so I want to address another issue before we get to that, and that is whether or not philosophy is inherently complicated and confusing. And I have a graphic up here with 4 pictures, and the top 2 kind of show people in states of confusion, the complications of philosophy and all that. I think the average person, when you say even the word philosophy, they just kind of, they either recoil or they just kind of don't want to go there because it just seems complicated. And then you got the lady in the bottom left here who's kind of looking up, and she's kind of pensive, and she's thinking about, philosophical topics. And, of course, I got the orangutan on the bottom right, and there's a reason for that, okay? Is that, first of all, only humans can be philosophers, okay? Not even angels can be a philosopher, because philosophy has to do with natural reason. It has to do with kind of figuring stuff out. Angels don't have to figure stuff out because they have superior intellects and everything's infused, and, they kind of see all things. They see a lot of things at the same time. So they're not our equals in that regard. And God certainly doesn't have to do philosophy because he's God and he knows everything, and he's got nothing he needs to figure out. Okay, he's got the whole world figured out already. So we're unique that way. But I would like to contend that philosophy is inherently complicated because we are complicated creatures. Okay, we have a lot in similarity with our dogs and our cats, with the passions and the bodies and the emotions and the sensitive appetites and the drives and all that kind of stuff. We also have a lot in common with the angels, with intellect and will. And unlike any of those creatures, we also have thrown into the mix concupiscence, original sin, and that's what creates a very complicated life that we all know exactly what I'm talking about. It's tough. It's complicated. And so, if you delve into philosophy, you got to expect it's not going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be challenging. And I think if you're up for a challenge, you came to the right place. Okay, so let me know if you agree with that or not. Some people are like, I just try to keep a very simple life, and that's all good and well. But you can try to keep a very simple life, but you're still, impacted by original sin. You still have concupiscence. You're still going to be fighting things that you don't want. You still have a physical world that you're trying to make sense of. You're probably dealing with a spouse and kids and coworkers and neighbors. And, so life is not that simple. Okay. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. Before we get into the topic of pessimism, I do want to go back to the old allegory of the cave. Okay. In fact, next week, when I go on with Keith Downey on the Morning Joy Show, we're going to talk about the allegory of the cave. All right. So if you're out there, I'd love to know, do you know what the allegory of the cave is? Now, I know we've talked about this, and I don't want to put Sissel on the spot because she's the only one that is actually in my view right now. But on a scale of 1 to 10, just be honest, Sissel, and no shame. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, if somebody in the elevator said, "What's that allegory?"
Not the elevator. Always the elevator.
You're getting into a lot of conversations in the elevator.
I'll spend the whole time in the elevator just panicking over figuring out what to say.
Yeah, because people asking all these deep questions. In the elevator.
Dave gets into the elevator with some very interesting people, apparently.
Yeah. My average, trip on the elevator has no conversation at all. So just on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable do you feel discussing the allegory of the cave?
I think I'm solid 5.75.
But not a 6.
Not a 6. Not quite a 6.
Okay.
Quite a 6 is leaning a little too heavy on my knowledge. The general idea of it is in it that we can only see so much, but what we're seeing is not the full picture? Is that kind of the idea that what we're seeing is like...
Yeah. Well, that's part of it, is that we're seeing shadows.
Right.
We're not seeing reality, and
Right.
that reality is in another realm. And Plato also believed that learning is remembering. We have all this innate knowledge. It's kind of like this ultimate case of amnesia where you've forgotten everything and you got to go through your life trying to remember all the stuff that's already in your mind, right? So that's, and the reason why I go back to the allegory of the cave is Plato, of course, lived about 400 or 500 years before Christ. But he was really onto something, and it's probably the most famous kind of teaching or allegory in the entire history of philosophy, because what it shows is that what we experience, in the world, the physical world, there's more than meets the eye. I think we could agree to that. I mean, if you just look at a dog, there's more than just the fur and the teeth and the eyes and the tail. There's something else there that is in that dog than just what you can sense you can experience with your senses. Okay,
with my dog's not a lot of brain, but yes.
Yeah. Or if you see a picture of something, if I saw a picture of my wife, there's more to my wife than what I can just see physically in the picture, right? There's something else. And that's what Plato was getting at. Now, he put it in a whole different realm, the realm of forms, and every philosopher since then has had some kind of commentary or some kind of throwback to this whole idea that, is what we see in the world the whole thing? I mean, and some would say yes. They'd say, yeah, that's it. There's nothing else. There's no metaphysics. There's nothing beyond the physical world, right? And so then in the next slide, you've got a picture of Jesus Christ, the crown of thorns on there, though. And I've always contended that all of philosophy ultimately leads to Jesus Christ, okay? So, and you think of Plato's realm of forms, you've got this metaphysical realm of forms up here, you've got the world of the senses down here. What is Jesus Christ? Well, he is a physical man with a body and a soul and intellect and a will, but then he's also God, okay? So he is like metaphysical and physical and sense. He's got the whole thing, all packed into this one person, okay? So if you want to know philosophy and you want to make it as simple as possible, you have to spend time with Jesus, because I think Jesus is the culmination of all philosophy and all theology. It descends upon this one person, all right, which is interesting, okay, because that's the basis of our faith, right? Our faith, it really is based on a relationship with Jesus Christ. As we move on to the philosopher of pessimism, I'll just remind you of a slide I showed you last week of Immanuel Kant and some of his influences: Isaac Newton, René Descartes, David Hume, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And the point here, and something that I find a lot of people are very interested in learning about, in fact, I had a conversation with my friend Jerry Jacob just 30 minutes ago, is kind of connecting all the dots, okay? So which philosopher influenced which other one? How did they learn what they learned? And I've used many examples of this in the past about none of these guys are an island. None of them are in a vacuum. None of them are just kind of learning this on their own. They're all studying each other, and they're all influencing each other as well, okay? So when we get to our friend Arthur Schopenhauer in the next slide here, I have some of the same influences like Newton, like Descartes, and, you could put Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas, and, there's a whole lot more than this. But I've also added Charles Darwin, okay? Because Charles Darwin, of course, The Descent of Man, The Origin of Species, basically said that man is man, there's no metaphysics, there's no God, there's no heaven, we're just animals, right? And we're just evolving animals. We might be a little smarter than the apes and the crickets, but there's nothing metaphysical about it, right? And so Schopenhauer would kind of take that same kind of pessimistic view of man and then bring it to more of a metaphysical level, I guess you could say. And so let's get into Schopenhauer, okay? So the first slide, first of all, you just look at that guy. Other than the cool haircut, you got to say the guy doesn't look like a real happy guy.
Dave, you and I have different opinions on cool haircuts.
You like his haircut?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Well,
okay.
no.
Oh, okay.
I feel
was
like
being
it's
facetious.
No,
yeah.
He's. I feel like it's adding to his whole.
Kind of.
I am a pessimist.
Yeah.
So I'm not even going to care.
I know, and it's kind of sad because I don't think anybody wants to be a pessimist.
No.
I don't think anybody. It's just a negative view in life, and so what we're going to do over the next 10 or 15 minutes is we're going to talk about some of his teachings. And again, if you want to comment, if you want to ask any questions, feel free to do so. Is that, and this is kind of ironic, he's the philosopher of pessimism, but he's called a German idealist philosopher, okay? The whole idealism is a little hard for me to get my head around because I don't think there's just one definition. Some people say idealism means that it has to do with the mind, it has to do with spirit, more than the physical world. Some people would say idealism just means that they have an ideal, they have something, so I can't honestly put my finger on exactly what that means. But if you go back in his history, he grew up in a pretty wealthy family. His dad was a merchant, a businessman, and wanted Arthur to follow that mode, make a good living, be wealthy, be in the upper class. But Arthur was like, no, thanks. I'm going to be a philosopher. Okay. So that upset his father very much. And whether it was directly related to that or not, I don't know. But when Arthur was a teenager, his dad committed suicide. Okay. So I've heard many analysts say this was probably the one of the key reasons why Schopenhauer turned so negative, so pessimistic about life, okay? He also had a very socialite mother who was very, the lady about town and had a lot of, lovers. And I think Schopenhauer resented her. She ended up kicking him out of the house. And he was estranged from his mom for the last 20 or 30 years of his life. And so no good relationships. I don't know if he had any siblings or not. If so, they're not mentioned that much. He also very much disliked Georg Hegel. Okay, remember we talked about Georg Hegel last time? He was a contemporary of Georg Hegel. In fact, they taught at the same university. All right, they taught at the exact same university. And Schopenhauer thought Hegel was overly optimistic. He was a charlatan. In fact, I have a quote here on the screen. He called Hegel a commonplace, inane, loathsome, repulsive, and ignorant charlatan.
Dang, bro.
Okay.
Hold back, why don't you? Goodness.
If anybody ever says that about you, Sissel, they're not being nice. Okay,
thank you for clarifying, because I might have taken that badly.
Now, here's an interesting story, and I've heard this from so many different sources. It's true. Okay, so Schopenhauer and Hegel taught the same university. Okay, I don't have any reason to believe. I don't believe. Okay, Hegel was the most famous philosopher of his age. Okay, right. He was, even in the time of his life, a very famous one. Schopenhauer was not. Okay,
that's why he was salty.
Schopenhauer really resented that. And so what he did was he scheduled his lectures at the exact same time at the exact same university as Hegel. And they say that on many occasions, nobody showed up for Schopenhauer. Okay,
he's doing this to himself.
I know, but he's
this?
just being a jerk. He's just being a jerk.
He's like, let me schedule at the same time. And then when no one shows up to this class, that guy, I'm like, dude, the most famous philosopher is having his course. Of course, everyone's going to that one. You should schedule yours
like 15 minutes before Hegel in the same room, because all the people are coming here. And then, there you go. You got the built-in audience.
Better about yourself that
way.
But
it shows you something about the mind of Schopenhauer is that he never really achieved fame in his lifetime, but he did achieve fame eventually. In fact, I don't know, even today, he in one of his books, it's so funny. He had it out so much for Hegel. Oh my gosh. And he said in his book, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, I apologize to my reader in referencing Georg Hegel, somebody whom in the future I know many of you will say, I've never heard of him. So he basically is saying, for my future readers, I apologize referring to this guy because I know you've never heard of him. Okay. he was wrong about that.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, I don't know if I don't know about the average person. Maybe someone could comment and let us know. Like, do you think you've heard more about Hegel than Schopenhauer? Because I think Hegel is more of a common name, in my opinion, in philosophy.
But do you think the average person even knows Hegel, though?
May not even know either of them, but I don't know. If you're going to know one, I'd think Hegel than over Schopenhauer, but that's just me.
Yeah. That would be very interesting. You know,
we should put out a poll, Dave, like a poll to all the listeners, and just be like, who do you know?
But yeah, I think you'd have to go to like Walmart or something. You'd have to
ask the most average,
even Catholic radio listeners are not going to be your typical people because they're much more educated, at least about theology. But I would, my guess. You round up 100 people at Walmart, you know, they'd be of all different ages and sexes and races, and you say, Schopenhauer, Hegel. My guess would be, and this is just me, I'd say about 3 of them would have heard of 100, would have heard of Schopenhauer, and about 10 Hegel. It'd be low in both cases. Do you think Hegel would be higher?
I think that's pretty good odds, period. That
you think that's too high?
Well, I don't know, but I agree. I think it would probably be Hegel more. I'm now very curious. I wonder, like, excuse me, GRN family, can we go out with a camera and a microphone?
Wouldn't that be funny?
Wouldn't that be hilarious, Dave? Thinking out loud in public.
Yeah, that would be good. We should go out to
that would be a great YouTube video, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I've pretty much established he didn't like Hegel. But
no, I don't. I think we need more
details. He did admire Kant. Okay, so Schopenhauer's most famous book is called "The World as Will and Representation." Okay, and if you remember, I know not everybody watches all these. Okay, but very basically, Kant believed that there was this world of phenomena that is able to be known through the categories of the mind and all that. But then he believed that there was this noumenal world, which is the thing in itself, which is unknowable. Okay, so it's out there, but we can't know it. So what Schopenhauer does is he says, well, I agree about the phenomenon part. The noumena part is the will. Okay, that's something that we can know, and it is just this. Well, let me see. Let me go to the next slide, okay? And this is going to be kind of the description of the will, and so I think you'll appreciate this, okay?
Great. Whenever you say that, I just know it's not going to be.
It's not going to be.
It's not going to be good.
Okay, so now, just read this along with me, okay? So he says the entire world is driven by a single will of pure energy, which has no direction, no purpose, no telos, no end. Okay. Now let me read a little bit more, and then we'll explain this. Okay. Humanity is at the mercy of this mindless, aimless, universal will. The will to live, the will to exist, the will to keep the world going through procreation. Okay. So here's what he says: we all have drives. Okay. We have drives to eat, to sleep. We have sexual drives. Okay, we did not ask for them. Okay, they're just part of us. But dogs have the same one, an ant, a platypus, a whale. Okay, so he's saying that we just have this will that's built into us that's trying to keep us alive, trying to keep the species going through procreation. And he said it's all one big will that we're sucked into. Remember how Hegel kind of brought us all into spirit? Mm-hmm. Well, Schopenhauer's now doing this with the will. So there's this universal will that is he saw it very negatively. He's saying like animals are eating each other. They're hawks are tearing sparrows to pieces and eating them. And he looked out at the world and just said, this is crazy. There's so much, sadness and death and destruction. And we're all just kind of being tricked into procreating through our sex drives and keeping ourselves alive through getting hungry. And he saw this very negatively. Most people don't. Most people are like, hey, I kind of like that I have an appetite for food and, that kind of thing, right? But he saw it very negatively. And he said the will is blind, incessant impulse, the will to live, endless striving without knowledge. And then this is where he goes wrong. He says there's no logos, no cosmic reason, which our reason can participate in. Our wills are unfree participants in the cosmic will, okay? So we're just moving along. We're being driven by our wills. And he, for somebody who didn't like people, he sees like, okay, when a man is attracted to a woman, he's being tricked, okay? So that he didn't ask for it.
He found us out.
And when a woman is attracted to a man, all it is this divine trick, not divine. He doesn't believe in God. It's this evil trick to just bring forth more babies, you know? And everybody kind of gets sucked into it. Everybody, you know, feels it, that you can't stop it, and you're just driven by all your desires. Okay.
It's fascinating because that philosophy, I think, might be more popular nowadays but more from the standpoint of not that like the desires, like sexual desires are bad to like have it, but the whole it being for making babies is like kind of taken out of it now. You know what I mean? So I think some people would agree like, oh, well, you don't want to get trapped into having a kid, kind of like with abortion and birth control and stuff like that. Like that's not the only reason for having, you know, sex and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, back then there wouldn't have been any of that.
There wouldn't have been any of that. So he's just saying it's all bad. Like even there's like the desire to be close to someone like that, that's bad because it leads to you trapping you as a kid. Nowadays we'd say like, yes, that's right. Except for we have ways to stop it from having a
but
kid.
still, I mean, how many people have gotten themselves into a whole lot of trouble because of these desires, or they're having affairs. They're just driven by this. I mean, sexual addiction. People, putting themselves into, the what is it called, the 9-step program or something like that, 12-step program, but they didn't ever ask for any of this stuff, and so Schopenhauer sees it very negatively. And now, from a Christian perspective, we'd say, no, babies are good. Life is good. And so JP2 writes about this in Theology of the Body, is that these are good impulses, because the biggest difference is that we would believe that man and women are made to the image and likeness of God, so that anytime a new life comes into the world, this is a beautiful reflection of Almighty God, made to the image and likeness of God with intellect and will and all that. But Schopenhauer has none of that background. Okay, he's an atheist. And so he's only looking at it from a human standpoint, a temporal standpoint. He can't lift it up above just the sensitive desires that he's feeling, right? The world is meaningless and cruel. Animals are killing and eating each other, as I mentioned. Every creature is in a constant state of desire that never is relieved. And he said, man lives in a state of constant disappointment and frustration as we try to satisfy all of our physical cravings. Okay? So do physical cravings create disappointment? And
I think it's the only way, in my humble opinion here, is that it's disappointing is when you allow them to overrun you, which you could easily. Yeah, sure. We're all sinful people, but that's the beauty of the Christian life, is that you have that's the fruit of the Spirit, self-control.
And that's
self-control.
And that's the whole idea of virtue.
Yeah.
Is like temperance and controls.
And how the beautiful satisfaction of, with God's help, being able to control those things, and so that you can allow yourself to have that good food, but and to have a marriage and all these things that are good and beautiful when done properly in moderation.
I will say one thing that I kind of agree with him on is that, like, if you've ever had the experience of just being starving, and all you can think about is, I just want to go and eat, and you go to Chili's and you have a double cheeseburger and some fries, and you feel really satisfied, and all of a sudden all those longings are over, and then 5 hours later you're in the exact same situation.
Like we started over,
and there's this cycle of like desire, and then you satiate that desire. And then you're back into desire. And then, but if you didn't see it from anything beyond the physical, of these desires just keep coming back, and it applies to sleep and to sex and to food and everything else. And so Schopenhauer sees this, and then since he probably has a very negative idea about any kind of divinity because of his past and his dad committing suicide, and he hates God, and he sees it all negative. Okay, so that's kind of where he is. Now, the next slide says, man is not superior to the animals because our reason is a slave to the passions, just as with the animals. Okay, so he doesn't see a role for reason. He doesn't see how reason can come in and moderate the desires. Okay, that's the whole basis of the Christian kind of moral and ethical paradigm, is that reason controls our passions, but he has it completely upside down. The passions are controlling reason, right? When the will actually manages to satisfy itself, life benumbing boredom quickly sets in, and the striving is reawakened, okay? He says the purpose of life is to seduce us to procreate more living things, to perpetuate the cycle of misery in the world. This is a direct quote from his book. Life is an expiation of the crime of being born. We begin in the madness of carnal desire and the transport of voluptuousness. We end up in the dissolution of all of our parts and the musty stench of corpses. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Is that how he signed off all his letters? Like the quote at the end of his signature, you know?
Yeah.
He doesn't, you said he doesn't believe in God or anything like that. So who is he blaming for this? Like, who is he mad at?
It's
just life.
It's almost like it's just a reality that obviously you can't say that nothing exists. So he's saying this is a situation, this kind of impersonal, cruel will is driving everything. And so everything is in competition and everything has all these drives, but he sees no purpose. There's no end. It's not moving towards anything. There's no telos. And so if you saw it that way, you would probably come to the same conclusion. I mean, let's say you don't see the dignity of a child or a baby in the womb, and let's just say you have a very negative idea about a baby in the womb. Well, then you'd say, well, whatever causes that has got to be bad, and each one of us has in us a drive for reproduction, right? And so the conclusion is, well, where did that come from? It must come from some evil source, some will that is bent on my destruction, because it's trying to convince me to create these dastardly little babies and keep this miserable world going. Okay, this is the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. Okay, and he continues to be very influential in our culture today because there is a lot of pessimism. There's a lot of people that don't see the value of life, the value of children. Okay, and I think I would argue that this is very much an influence of Schopenhauer.
I feel like Back to the Father for me has become psychoanalyzing philosophers, but I feel like he might have been upset with himself to not be able to control his own desires. I think that's what it is. I think because it's like he's lacking in that temperance area and he's frustrated by that.
Yeah.
He's like, he goes, so he has coming up with some reason that it's not his fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Got to blame something else.
He's got to blame something. And again, he had a rough go of it with parents.
He did have some children out of wedlock. I think they died.
Yeah. That's really rough.
He just
wasn't successful clearly in like a long-term relationship.
Oh no, never got married. Never got married.
Friendships and everything like that. So he's trying to find the reason why these things are happening rather than going, hey, like he creates a whole philosophy instead of looking, hey, maybe I need to take a month and evaluate my life here.
Maybe go on a silent retreat or something.
Yes, exactly. Like just chill for a minute here, bro.
All right. The only solution is non-existence or the loss of a will for gratification. The will must be distracted from its cravings. Okay, now this is another key to Schopenhauer, okay? He said the solution is aesthetic contemplation, especially with music or a contemplation on the Platonic forms, since they transcend the material world. He did not advocate for suicide, but rather to learn a way to tame the will. So what he says was,
he's just saying to numb it.
Yeah, well, he's saying, okay, rather than, like if his mind goes towards places he doesn't want it to go, like, sexual desires and things like that, he can just stare off at like a sunset. And that doesn't have to do with his will. He's not being taken anywhere he doesn't want to go by just contemplating beauty, right? So he's saying, maybe I just do that. Maybe I just contemplate truth, or like he doesn't want. Do you understand what I'm saying? He doesn't want to He doesn't want to end up at the all-you-can-eat, buffet at Pizza Hut.
So he's trying to come up with something that's like a neutral good that he can just focus on instead of I want to eat 10 hot dogs.
The desires.
The desires.
And I think he especially was caught up in the sexual part. Yeah, this drive to, and he hated the fact that he felt like he was being tricked to procreate, and he rebelled against it. But then again, he can't deny that he had these urges, but he hated it. He resented it.
I'm trying to think. I mean, that idea in and of itself, maybe it's not the worst idea. There's worse things you could do. You could be like trying to get away from, okay, so you have like these strong sexual desires. So instead you go eat 10 pounds of ice cream. Kind of you're like, well, at least I'm not doing that one, but now I'm doing this one. So I guess it's nice that he's found something kind of neutral that is not harming himself per se, but it's still lacking. His game plan is lacking a little bit.
The next slide talks about his Eastern influence. Arthur Schopenhauer was the first Western philosopher to really be very much influenced by Eastern religion, okay? If you understand Buddhism and the whole idea of nirvana, the highest state a person can achieve where desires and sufferings go away, extinction, disappearance of the individual to the universal, okay? So Buddhism says that the highest goal, the nirvana, is to totally negate your desires, okay? To not have desires, because that Eastern religion would say that that's the source of all of our problems. Doesn't that sound very Schopenhauer-ish? So Schopenhauer studied Buddhism. He studied Hinduism. And there's more of a negative idea of the passions, whereas Christianity would say the passions are neutral. Okay, when we feel passions, but we can direct it to the bad or we can direct it to the good. All right, so he was influenced by the negative philosophy of Eastern religions. Okay, passions are to be suppressed. The will is something to be resisted since we are slaves to its demands. Individual will and the will of the world are one and the same. Okay, so now this is one other interesting thing. We're almost done here. Is that he said, okay, this universal will and our individual wills are one and the same. Okay, that's kind of like a monistic type of thought. All right, so therefore, anything I do is going to impact you because we're all kind of together, right? So he did think that one of the ways that you get around the awfulness of this world is to have compassion. Interestingly, you wouldn't think that he would say that.
So funny.
Yeah, that you would have compassion because it's kind of like we're all in this together, okay? Well, it's all one big will. We're all sharing in it. So if I hurt you, I'm actually hurting myself, okay? So it's like even bad philosophy has something good about it, And so he shared that kind of Christian notion of compassion for others, something that Nietzsche, by the way, will totally abandon. Nietzsche did not believe in compassion. All right, so finally, the last slide here, his legacy. Schopenhauer's writings were largely ignored during his lifetime, but since then, he has become extremely influential. His teaching on the primacy of the will influenced Friedrich Nietzsche's writing. In fact, Nietzsche wrote a book called The Will to Power. And Nietzsche, interestingly, totally turned Schopenhauer upside down. And instead of being pessimistic, he was incredibly optimistic about the power of man to exercise his will and rise above himself. But Nietzsche was also an atheist, and so he didn't have any place for God. He just thought men should really excel and be excellent, but outside of God, okay? Nietzsche was an atheist, and he wrote favorably about the will and man's need to overcome himself. The ideal was the Superman, the Übermensch in German, the ideal, heroic figure. The will drives man to greatness. Okay, see, exact opposite of Schopenhauer. Okay, Schopenhauer said the will drives man to madness, to pain, to agony, to misery. Nietzsche was exact opposite. He also influenced the study of psychology where his ideas of basic urges influenced the writing of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And I would argue that our world today is extremely influenced by Sigmund Freud. Have you heard of like the Freudian slip?
Oh yeah.
And like let's say Freud would say you have a dream that you're being attacked by a tiger, right? And Freud would say, well, that tiger represents, you know, your
demons,
your boyfriend, or your boss, or or like there's everything is subconscious. Just like Schopenhauer said, there's this kind of this will that we can't control that's kind of pushing us along, and it's outside of us. So Freud admitted that he had a great, he was influenced very much by, and interestingly, Freud made much of his teaching about sexuality. This whole like repression of sex, everything kind of connected to sexuality one way or the other. That's Schopenhauer's influence on him, because Schopenhauer was also very, very much obsessed with the sexual question as well. Carl Jung, have you ever heard of him?
I have heard of him. I can't think off the top of my head much about what he believed or taught, but I have heard of
Carl
him.
Jung was also probably Freud and Jung are the two most famous psychologists of all time.
Sure.
And I think they were contemporaries. They probably knew each other. I think they both were Austrian.
Oh, okay.
I may be wrong. Oh, yeah, Freud was Austrian, and I think Carl Jung was as well. I may be wrong about that.
From Switzerland.
Oh, Switzerland. Okay, but
Swiss.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And but Freud was Austrian, right?
I'm assuming so. I will look it up.
Don't
though.
assume.
One second, y'all.
Okay, so all right. So Freud taught that we do not freely and rationally will, but are moved by unconscious forces over which we have no power. For Freud, this was the animal instinct called the id. To Schopenhauer, it was the blind, cruel, cosmic will. Okay, so all of a sudden you see where there's this emphasis on something driving us that we have no control over. This, free will is going to be compromised because we're just kind of be driven to an end, and it doesn't make any sense. There's no God, there's no telos, there's no end, there's no purpose. And you can see how that would lead to a lot of sadness and a very misguided, dark, gloomy vision of the world. That's Schopenhauer. So everybody, I hope you had a good day.
Way to start out your weekend.
Enjoy your weekend. No, but here's the good thing is that we are not disciples of Arthur Schopenhauer. Okay, I don't like.
Gosh, can you imagine being a disciple following Arthur Schopenhauer?
Yeah, but what are the lessons here is that, if somebody, Cecil here, she lost a mother when she was at a very young age, at about 20 or so. And a lot of people will take something like that, turn against God, and say, I don't believe in God, and it totally darkens everything. And I met a guy one time. His father committed suicide when he was 10, and he said, I go home and I yell at my wife and my kids. And I can't help myself. I'm so mad at God. And so I think there's a lesson there. You got to, try to look beyond circumstances. And then also, I think when God is not in the picture for somebody like Schopenhauer, that takes you down dark paths. Somebody like Aquinas was never described as a pessimist. Aquinas saw everything as good, mosquitoes and snakes and scorpions and, you name it. I mean, everything has some goodness in it, all right? Mm-hmm. Somebody said one time, what about cancer? Since cancer exists, is it good? Does it have anything good? I mean, that's
a big question. Obviously, neither of us have experienced that, so it's hard. But I
cancer is like a corruption of health.
Right.
It's kind of like blindness. Blindness is not good because it's a corruption of sight, right?
Well, every ailment too can be heartbreaking, but kind of just like any circumstance in life that happens to you is also an opportunity for us to grow closer to God. Right. So I would say, even me losing my mom, it was actually very significant in my faith life. So, you could totally take it as this is happening to me. God is allowing this to happen to me, you know, like it's very much and not, but then you can take a step back and be like, actually. You know.
Yeah. But when you start with a premise like Schopenhauer did, that the whole thing is kind of rigged against you, and this blind, cruel force is driving you into places you don't want to be, then that takes you into dark places. And then you begin to see everything kind of with that lens of darkness and that lens of pessimism. And I don't think that ends very well. So anyways, that's not our belief as Christians. We are optimists. We believe that every passion, every thought, every impulse has some kind of purpose and so ultimately driving us towards the goodness of God, right? Every drive that we have, every appetite is ultimately connected to a good God. And when you have that in your mind, that changes everything. It really does. That's the program. I don't know if we had any comments. But
I think everyone was just so enthralled, Dave, that they are just listening. Hey, you know, this might be a little short later on that they can get like the summary of what we talked about, you know?
Yeah. And by the way, one of our shorts kind of mini viral.
A mini viral for us was like a couple thousand views, which is like awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
So keep it going.
Anyways, maybe you like it in bite-sized morsels. Okay. Whatever the AI computer thought was the most important part of this 44-minute diatribe is going to turn into a short, and by golly, a lot of people are probably going to watch it. So thank you, Sissel, and thank you all for watching. If you're watching this on a recorded basis and you want to participate in the live show, we do this every Friday at 1 o'clock. It's called Back to the Father, and we're on the Facebook, YouTube, and X channels of Guadalupe Radio Network, and we certainly appreciate and would love your feedback and your questions, and just kind of get into this great conversation as we talk about philosophy, especially focused on the teachings of the angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas. That's it for today. Thank you very much for participating and watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next Friday for the next Back to the Father.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.